And so I'm live. Every now and again, 9 o'clock catches us by a little surprise. But we are here, or at least I am. I will be joined in moments, just mere moments, by Teresa. And she will, you know, keep you company as we gather together and say hello to this Friday morning. It's a beautiful Friday morning here in Portland. It's actually looking like spring. I'm looking at the brightest of green leaves set against a lovely blue sky. And it's a great morning to, share together as we face dire news about the potential end of the world and the more heartening news about labor struggle. And so, with that, gather together, I guess, is really just sort of it. We wait for Teresa's arrival. Yes, we do. Um, and we also wonder who is, in fact, so persistently calling my phone and making it buzz on the table. I throw it across the room now. I also look forward to editing all of these things out. John, thank you for joining us this morning. It's always great to have you. Um, what else can I say? Oh, our beloved viewers. I guess aside from the fact that, wow, 9 o'clock, really? A little preview of what might be coming up. Did you know? Did you know that this week we have just passed the 108th anniversary of the Ludlow Massacre? And some context for our burgeoning labor struggles. That is something that I am finding really heartening today. And that is that we do have a new class awareness that has seemed to have really grown over the last 3 years as we have seen the stark realities of our capitalist system in its death throes laid bare against the backdrop of COVID. And so, um, oh, I hear the pitter patter of Teresa's feet behind me. I do believe that she will be joining me in just moments. And I'll, at that time, probably slip away, my dear friends and viewers. Um, yes, I hear her. She's coming. I'm coming. Look, it's time for your tin toys. Yes, it is. I'll slip away now. Yes, that's me slipping. Ladies and gentlemen, our national anthem. My eyes, if you can. My hair's too short. All right. Broadcasting good?
Excuse me. We're almost there. This is very good today. Hello, Jabara. Hello, John. We're almost ready. I believe I heard the priestess getting holy. Oh, yeah. Okay. Shall we?
Yes, please.
All right. This one goes away. And that one goes away. Drinky bird steps to one side. All right. I'm just going to go ahead then.
Yes.
All right then.
Sorry, sneeze.
This is now Bridge to a Better World. I am Teresa Mitchell, and shortly,
Here I am, because I ain't
to
getting
my
any
left,
taller.
yeah, is is the priestess Miss Annie Haynes, and
Please. Well, I mean, it's true, but
yeah,
please.
your priestessness. Anyway, a couple of headline items, starting with a rather, well, as we prepared for this podcast, Marjorie Taylor Greene's attorney was quibbling about the language of her indictment in Georgia State Court. They might still be doing this live, by the way. As she was being charged with engaging, abetting in an insurrection versus the United States in violation of her oath of office. The 14th Amendment, which, as you will remember from your history lessons, was put in right after the Civil War, proscribes service from anyone who is engaged in insurrection, and the point of the hearing is that she should not be allowed to, again, run for office, which you would think would be pretty cut and dried. Actually, she should have been kicked out of office already under that amendment. You can't seat people who have engaged in insurrection. They should all be out of there. And I believe the political science term for that is fuck them. But the outcome of the hearing...
That's the technical term,
yeah, is very... I mean, honestly, that's not asking for much. But the outcome of the hearing is...
The ousting of congressional representatives that clearly aided and abetted an insurrection attempt?
Yeah, if you try to destroy the assembly, well, then you're out. I mean, that's just not...
Yeah, you know, I go for that. It makes sense to me.
Particularly aggro. Outcomes important as it also applies to several other politicians, and you can probably name them in their head, but I'm thinking of Ted Cruz and, of course, Trump himself. Boebert, yeah. Green must also...
I mean, remember, there were congressional reps that were texting about the whereabouts of their colleagues, you know, as they were in hiding. Oh, the speaker has moved.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, they were helping.
Yeah, aiding and abetting in real time.
This hunt, and they could have easily been, well, they were to be kidnapped at least and possibly hung. Green must also appear before the Congressional January 6th committee to answer questions under subpoena. By the way, Green's idiotic defense against the 14th Amendment charge in the Georgia court is that the 14th Amendment to the Constitution is not constitutional.
Okay.
Yeah. That's Green logic for you. So, latest from Ukraine.
Jewish space lasers. Just
yes,
saying.
Exactly. Latest from Ukraine is that the C-14, that's the white supremacists naming themselves after the 14-word pledge to protect whiteness, right sector, Adar, Azov Nazis, and their associated Atomwaffen from the U.S. are starving along with their hostages in the Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol, and that's actually the Russian propaganda line. And the Russians are using that to obscure the fact that the Russians intend to starve and bomb the civilians there, whether they're hostages or not. My opinion is that whereas there are regular Ukrainian troops there, the propaganda line is almost accidentally closer to the truth. And Russians and Donbas independents are pretty gleeful that the Nazis there are about to get bombed flat. It's a huge place, 4 square miles, full of tunnels, an excellent last fortress holdout. But it's 4 square miles of hell now. Food, water, and medical care are denied, and you can imagine how painful that is when a lot of people have been, shot or injured by bomb fragments. From The Guardian, and this is a quote: a senior military commander, Russian military commander, has said that the goal of Russia's new offensive is to seize control of southern Ukraine and form a land bridge to Crimea, indicating that Russia plans a permanent occupation of Ukrainian territory taken in the war. And that, of course, is in direct opposition to what they initially said. Rustam Minikayev, acting commander of the Central Military District, also told members of a defense industry forum on Friday that control over southern Ukraine would give Russia access to Transnistria, a pro-Russian breakaway region of Moldova, indicating that Russia may attack the port city of Odessa. And speaking for myself, other writers say that it doesn't seem likely that they will seriously attack. They may attack the port city of Odessa, but they don't actually have the troops in place to occupy it. The remarks, going back to the quote here, the remarks directly contradict earlier claims from Vladimir Putin that Russia was not planning to occupy Ukrainian cities permanently, and suggest the Kremlin is changing tack after its failed offensive towards Kyiv, which appeared to seek regime change.
And while we're on the subject of that war, Biden has authorized another $1.3 billion of military aid to Ukraine, right? That's $1.3 billion. And I understand that Russia's bloody invasion of its neighboring country is beyond terrible. I'm horrified at the thought and the news that is coming out of the area daily. I'm absolutely appalled by Russia's apparent war crimes. It's unconscionable and, kind of brings up that whole never again. What will we do to stop madmen in power? But I don't believe that shoveling over $1 billion of military equipment, weapons, more weapons into conflict do not create peace, right? We know that. And I don't think that shoveling more than $1 billion of weaponry into a conflict that is threatening to go nuclear is adding to anyone's security. I think that what we could do with that money domestically, in terms of dealing with climate change, in terms of dealing with education, or any of the parts of our failing infrastructure, in terms of guarantees for housing or COVID relief, since we no longer have free vaccines and testing because COVID's over, right? And yet people's lives are still devastated by it, and it's still a public health emergency. There's so much that we could do with $1.3 billion that don't line the pockets of defense contractors. Sure, I'm horrified by the war. I'm horrified by Russia's aggressions. And I want to see the world unified in finding diplomatic solutions to war and not ways to escalate. Before the war actually started, before Putin's invasion in February, the Union of Atomic Scientists stated that the doomsday clock was remaining at 100 seconds to midnight, which is as close as it's ever been. It's been there for a couple years now because of a generally destabilized world. They've not moved the clock since the end of January because they haven't met since the end of January. But they do have an excellent article on their website. And again, the website is the Union of Atomic Scientists. Just search that in your search engine of choice. Their article, Siegfried Hecker, Putin has destroyed the world nuclear order. How should democracies respond? Sure, it's a little unwieldy as article names go, but it's a good article. In that article, Hecker, who is a nuclear policy expert and editor of the book Doomed to Cooperate, How American and Russian Scientists Joined Forces to Avert Some of the Greatest Post-Cold War Nuclear Dangers. I think Hecker just has a way of having awkward titles.
He's an academic.
Okay. He notes that in 90s Russia's nuclear policy, in the 90s, Russia's nuclear policy changed. So that, in previous to that, both Russia, the USSR, and the US had a clear demarcation point. There are conventional weapons that could be used in war, and then there was the unthinkable, the mutually assured destruction, the don't touch that pile, we're just stockpiling them, don't really use them pile of nuclear weapons. But in the 90s, Russia's nuclear policy changed and no longer draws a sharp distinction between conventional weapons and nuclear weapons. Hecker says that in his opinion, there is a very real risk of Putin ordering the use of nuclear weapons. And I guess I'll just end it by saying I really recommend folks read that article in its entirety on the website of the Union of Atomic Scientists. So, carry on. Is there more that you want to say on?
Well, about nuclear war, some commenters have pointed out that the U.S. and Russia were at each other's throats over Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, but nuclear war did not break out. The reason being that mutually assured destruction was in place, which is still in place. And so despite all of Putin's bluster, they know very well, everyone who actually knows what nuclear weapons are about, which I certainly hope includes their generals, understands that they really can't start a nuclear war, and that's why there hasn't been one. I mean, there's been a couple of places and times in Ukraine where it would have been handy to just use a battlefield nuke, and they know damn well not to go there. The whole mess about weapons of mass destruction, about usage of gas in Ukraine is related to that. The usage of gas could easily be a gateway to usage of nukes, since these are both weapons of mass destruction. They're anti-civilian weapons, basically, and all large bombs are. But this is, it's game over for both parties if this is used. So it's quite a danger. It's a worse danger now. It's more of a danger than people ever realized. It's been over our heads all these years, and looking at it is pretty scary. But in a sense, it hasn't really changed. Excuse me while I pet my dog.
I was going to say the dog is
he's not willing to wait for this. He needs some petting right now, so I'm going to do that. But
since he is an 11-year-old Great Dane, we pet him.
Yeah. So this gets down to what are the opposing sides willing to risk? What do the Russians really want? I was looking at a string of emails, which unfortunately I did not preserve and can't give you the URL to. That was making a pretty good point using old Russian, Russian newspaper political cartoons going back at least a decade, and they showed Ukrainians as sort of these clueless troglodytes. And the point the writer was making is that it isn't just Putin having the idea that Ukraine is basically a hinterland of Russia full of easily deluded fools who need to be set right, and he had this coming. A really ugly thought, and according to that writer, a common one. And I think they, with the newspaper cartoons, kind of showed that, yeah, that must have been a fairly common attitude, and must be now among Russians. And of course, then there's the professional Russian propaganda, which has only gotten better over the years and even been applied to the American population quite effectively. So that's driving things as well.
And so how do we, I'm sorry.
No, that's the end of it. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I thought you were getting towards your dramatic conclusion, and I just wanted to jump in and say, so how do we then, as the rest of the world, okay, perhaps not in totality, but a goodly portion of the rest of the world, coming together to say, no, we insist on ceasefire, we insist on diplomatic solutions. How do we do this in terms of stopping an aggressive military incursion?
Actually,
I don't have an answer to that. I'm just really curious. I've always been really curious.
Yeah, sanctions and arms supplies are the answer, and there isn't a better one that I can think of. I mean, and the sanctions will take a while to bite, so they can't really be offered as. We can't go to the Russians right now and say, well, we'll lift the sanctions because they are very proudly resisting the sanctions, and they'll just say, screw you and your sanctions. It just proves that you're evil. So negotiations need to start, and Russian pride and this attitude that they feel like they're only doing the right thing. The Ukrainians had it coming, and that it's their business and not the business of the West because this is their territory.
Mm-hmm.
An ugly attitude and one that is difficult to work with.
So there we are.
There you have it.
But again, I'm not a pacifist, right? I'm not. But I do really, I think that war is abominable and that we must find diplomatic solutions. There is no way to peace, but peace is the way.
You know what would really move things forward? I'm sorry.
Do tell.
Would be the West saying, okay, we admit it. We hired, trained, and armed Nazis, and we did it to bug the shit out of you. And those Nazis used artillery to bomb the Donbass and created thousands of casualties since 2014. If we would just admit that, I think that would just make huge progress. And I don't see any chance of the West admitting that. That's supposed to be Russian propaganda. We're not supposed to admit that at all. And the only thing that I've seen about the Azov Battalion is about how, the Nazi aspect is overblown and that Wolfsangel, and then they don't even say the Sonnenrads and the swastikas and the icons of Hitler that they put proudly on the wall and have to take down when they do broadcasts. Don't mean that they're Nazis. No, they're Nazis. They're really dedicated, dyed-in-the-wool C-14 Nazis. So we need to admit that if we want any progress at all. And that is not an excuse for them to invade. I've got to emphasize that. That could be used just as well to invade the United States. The United States is chock full of Nazis too, and to about the same percentage. Probably about.
And I think you could actually.
1% to 3%.
Oh yeah, what was that first story? We could find some of them in Congress.
Yeah.
Was there more in headlines?
Let's see. What other headlines do I have? No, I'm ready to go to.
Well, I have a couple more headlines.
Okay, well, let's go to
headlines. This from Democracy Now! This morning, a new report by Human Rights First condemns the Biden administration for imprisoning tens of thousands of asylum seekers at Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, jails, where they face prolonged detention periods, physical and psychological abuse, medical neglect, racism, a lack of legal and language resources, and other harms. The group says that their imprisonment is wasteful, cruel, and it's a violation of U.S. and international law. So that's happening for asylum seekers. I'm going to say asylum seekers that are not Ukrainian, asylum seekers that are not white. Also in related news from Democracy Now!, documents obtained by a coalition of immigrant rights groups reveal that ICE has contracted with third-party data broker LexisNexis to allow it to receive real-time jail booking data from sheriff's offices in the state of Colorado. The move to track the whereabouts of immigrants curtails Colorado's sanctuary policies, which are meant to prevent state and local law enforcement from cooperating with ICE. Jacinta Gonzalez of Mi Gente's No Tech for ICE campaign said ICE agents once relied on the police to help them track us and arrest us and deport us. Now, tech companies, Nexus Lexus, are selling our personal data and helping them instead. So there's that. Also want to point out that a federal judge has halted Kentucky's 15-week abortion ban, at least for now. The U.S. District Judge Rebecca Grady Jennings, who was a Trump appointee, blocked the law from taking effect for the next 2 weeks after Kentucky's 2 remaining abortion providers said that the law's provisions prevented them from continuing abortion care. Both clinics now plan to resume offering abortions. Kentucky Republicans passed the bill in March before overriding a veto by Democratic Governor Andy Beshear last week. This comes as the Supreme Court is weighing Mississippi's 15-week abortion ban in a case that could overturn the landmark Roe v. Wade ruling from 1973.
Is that it?
Yeah, let's, okay, one more.
Okay, one more.
There are 4 families, a couple of medical providers, and a minister in Alabama who have issued a new legal challenge to the recently passed so-called Vulnerable Child Compassion and Protection Act. That act is the new law in Alabama that criminalizes healthcare for trans youth and provides punishments of up to 10 years in prison for people who help trans youth get health care. Without a stay, so while that challenge is going through, the 4 families are seeking an emergency stay of the law while their case is heard. Without a stay, the law is slated to go into effect on May 8th. It's just 2 weeks away, basically. The families involved in the case are doing so anonymously because they fear prosecution. Those 4 families have trans youth ranging in age from 12 to 17 who will be immediately impacted and denied their health care. Their health care will be interrupted when and if that law goes into effect. Hence, seeking the emergency injunction while the law is being challenged. So that's happening. Now I think I'm done.
All right. Well, then I want to talk poverty, and I want to talk unions. And I want to pet this cat. There's a large tail, large fluffy tail.
Oh, Ozymandias.
Yeah. So, while the real estate-dominated Portland City Council still, by and large, tries to frame the homelessness crisis as drugs and demeanor, the real source has arisen from real estate speculation and the persistent idea among local employers that all they owe their producing employees is the absolute minimum the market will bear. And this attitude can be traced to Reaganism and to the well-thumbed copies of Atlas Shrugged in their bookcases and brains. But there is a fight back arising against Ayn Randian capitalism, and it's as close as your local Starbucks. By the way, activists have suggested that we visit a Starbucks and put it in order as Union Yes or Solidarity or some such, so that when they call out your order, they get to say that loudly. But I'll return to Starbucks in a minute. I want to talk about what all these years of low and diminishing wages have done. Recent article by the Washington Post fact checker looked closely at the fact that there are 140 million people who are poor or low income in the U.S. today. This is from Caris Center by an article by Shaylee Gupta Barnes. While they're clear to say that government data confirms this is an accurate statistic, the article also opened a debate on how poverty is measured. For several years, the Caris Center for Religions, Rights, and Social Justice and the Poor People's Campaign have been examining U.S. Census data on poverty. Since 2017, they write, we have worked with policy institutes and economists to develop an assessment of current measures of poverty and their limitations and identify the best measures to understand the state of poverty and economic insecurity in the U.S. today. This includes the Institute for Policy Studies and the Center on Poverty and Social Policy at Columbia University. And I want to hop out of that just for a minute and say, we can all see that we're in trouble when we have so many people living in tents. I mean, it's obvious. And all of these excuses about drugs just don't cut it. Through this collaboration, they write, we have compiled the following resource on why the Poor People's Campaign uses the supplemental poverty measure. going up to 200% of the poverty threshold to establish that there are 140 million poor and low-income people in this country. 140 million poor and low-income people in a country of 300 million. And this is a few years out of date. Things are, of course, worse. And so returning to the text, these numbers must be taken seriously. Despite current efforts by the Trump administration, we cannot hide these numbers behind restrictive definitions or measurements of poverty. And there are life-threatening consequences to minimizing these definitions, including 300,000 children and 250,000 adults losing access to health care. It's time to face the truth of poverty and economic insecurity in America. And here again, I'm going to speak for myself and say those $700 diabetes treatments. I mean, when you need $700 for a diabetes pin and you don't have $700, you're in poverty, you're in trouble, and you're in America. The U.S. Census provides two.
Again, I guess I'll point out the fact that there's an asthma inhaler that I use that is over $300. I think it was $380 if I did not have health insurance. And it's the same asthma inhaler I could buy from a pharmacy in Mexico for $40. So what is, again, going on in that? Go ahead.
Corruption. I mean, this corruption is creating horrible poverty and suffering. And we just need to, face the fact that this is a very corrupt society. We have let the most evil and greedy people through corporations, which allow them to deny anything and everything, to put us in this situation, which is unacceptable. U.S. Census provides two different measures of poverty: the official poverty measure and the supplemental poverty measure. The OPM, official poverty measure, was developed in 1963 and is based on income and food expense data from 1955. At that time, a poor family of three or more was found to spend about a third of its income on food. While the OPM has been updated to account for inflation based on the Consumer Price Index, it does not account for how household expenses have changed relative to the cost of food. The OPM still assumes the basic formula that households spend 1/3 of their income on food, but it does not reflect current patterns of household spending, including how rent, healthcare, gas, or common household expenses have changed since 1955. And
it surely has.
Things have changed just a little bit. In other words, it's a dodge. Hello, kitty cat. You have a very nice face, yes you do.
Snaggle-tooth.
In 1995, the National Academy of Sciences recommended a new measure for estimating poverty in the United States. The results has been development and U.S. Census Bureau publication since 2011 of the supplemental poverty measure. And they go on to say that they use this, and that threshold is $24,000 and change for a 4-person household. Under the SPM, the poverty threshold for a 2-child household range from $19,000 to $39,750, depending on your geography, whether you're a renter or a homeowner, and whether or not you had a mortgage. So just if you take the $30,000 figure and they're talking about a household of 4, you're talking about $625 for each person per month for housing, food, clothing, medicine, all the expenses of modern life. And that, as you know, is ridiculously, devastatingly low. And that's what produces these situations where, so much desperation is afoot. And I want to say, if you have, and if you do ration your use of your inhaler or your diabetes pin, then you are in this category. And this is half, at least, of United States citizens. So how do we get in this situation where half of the United States is accepting this grinding level of poverty? They write, although a broader and preferred measure, the SPM poverty threshold, that's the improved one, remains a meager estimate of poverty. For example, according to the SPM, a 4-person household with an income of $30,000 is not poor because they fall above the designated threshold. And as I said, that's $625 a month. Instead, the population living between 100 and 199% of the poverty threshold is sometimes defined as low income. While not technically categorized as poor, they are living just one emergency traffic violation or a healthcare crisis away from being poor, and most likely will fall under that poverty threshold and into poverty over the course of the year. This is why the 2019 National Academy's consensus report also makes reference to families with incomes below 200% of the SPM poverty threshold as a group to look at closely when considering economic insecurity. And here I want to depart from the text again and say, huge reason that this stays in place is that we have been taught to be ashamed of our poverty and not to name it. We do not acknowledge our poverty. We say that we are not, everyone says that they are middle class. I go on about this a lot, but it is an extremely poisonous point of view. If you don't have enough to live on for the next 3 years without another paycheck coming, you are not middle class. You're working class. You depend on that paycheck that you work for. The distinction between those who fall below threshold and those who fall above it is arbitrary for those living in economic insecurity, they write. They have demographics which they break down accordingly. 52% or 38.5 million children are below that threshold. 42% of elders above 64 years old, or 21 million, are below that threshold. And that puts a lie to this idea that boomers are rich. 42% are below this official and very low poverty bar, which means that it's more like half of elders are poor. 41.6 or 65.8 million men. 45% or 74.2 million women. 59.7 or 23.7 million black. Notice how that's double the statistics of 33.5 or 65.6 million white. And the other statistics go, as you would expect, 64% Latinx, 40.8% Asian people, 58.9 or 2.14 million Native and Indigenous people. Poverty is everywhere, and it affects all classes, and it affects people of color disproportionately, and it kicks blacks over the fence. A similar statistic came out of 2018 Federal Reserve on the economic well-being of U.S. households, finding that 40% of adults in this country could not afford a $400 emergency. So what has been the answer to this? For years and years, the answer was everyone's pretending it doesn't exist as best they possibly can. And, desperate things are happening. But the union victories at Starbucks and Amazon are now polarizing and iconic. And it's fascinating to me to see that public attitudes have changed towards unionization. You have something to say about that? Okay.
Carry on.
For decades, I had a sort of defensive patter all ready to roll against the amazingly predictable anti-union attitudes of my fellow Americans. And the pushback went something like this. Sure, there's corruption in American unions. Are you saying there's no corruption in American businesses? And I would say, democracy belongs in the workplace, only to hear my fellow workers say, no, it does not. And the justification for that seemingly shocking attitude was the delusion that maybe someday my pencil-pushing, keyword-clacking proletarian co-workers were going to have their very own mortgage company or what have you, and wanted to keep the playing field mountainous so they could then benefit.
See, I don't know that was actually the rationale. I think it
was. I was there.
Well, okay, fine. In my work experience, it was more to the point of don't make waves. Like, unions don't really do anything, and union dues cost a lot, and it's just kind of pointless, and you really can't expect better than this anyway. I mean, we already live in the best possible world, and it sucks. So what are you going to do about it?
Yeah,
it was more the self-defeatist. Well. I don't know that
organizing a union was illegal.
Yeah. So the only thing I'm disagreeing with you on is I don't think most Americans think that they're going to be the boss someday, and that's why they're anti-union. I think they're just trained to think that they're impotent, and unions are corrupt and just take your money and don't treat you any better than the bosses. And that's that kind of propaganda that sunk into the American psyche over the last few generations that have created the state that we find ourselves in. But over the last couple of years, it is being turned around, as we said earlier. The pandemic, especially during this last couple of years, has really laid bare the lie of the classless system, right? And how we're all in this together. So from that, I think a lot of the workers in jobs that have been considered unskilled or entry level, baristas, warehouse workers, are finding the solidarity to organize and to push back against the owners.
And it's still true that most Americans do not realize that we are in one of the worst countries for social mobility. That if you're born poor in America, it is most likely that you will remain poor. But there is a change in acceptance of unions. I mean, I think it's over 60% now. I've never seen this in my adult life. I think part of this is a belated sense of self-preservation. But another part is the slow fade of Hollywood anti-union agitation, which was very effective, is exemplified by the movie On the Waterfront, which would be quoted to me in the 80s and 90s as I tried to organize. I could have been a contender, they'd say, and urged me to see the movie. I never have, but it shows the power and persistence of stories of propaganda. So now we have a news story with the David versus Goliath tale of Christian Smalls versus Jeff Bezos. Quoting Alex Press article in Jacobin, it is hard to overstate the obstacles workers in New York and Alabama face to get this far. In addition to Amazon's inordinately high turnover rate, a menace for building sustained shop floor organization, Department of Labor filings released yesterday showed that Amazon spent $4.3 million on union busting consultants, a startling amount for any company. Usually it takes even mega corporations years to rack up that kind of a bill with a specialist in the uniquely American industry of professional anti-union experts. Many of the consultants leading captive audience meetings and otherwise crafting Amazon's war on organizing were paid $3,200 per day. On Staten Island, workers said union busters were a regular presence at JFK 8, the name of that warehouse. They wrote the scripts for the meetings and shaped the anti-union messaging that papered the warehouse's bathroom stalls and hallways, and it was also sent to workers via meetings, Instagram ads, phone calls, text messages, and videos projected on screens inside the video. Big Brother is watching your ass. ALU, for its part, is clear about the workers' demands. A $30 an hour minimum wage, increases on paid time off and vacation days, paid breaks during the day, union representation at any disciplinary meetings, and greater support for childcare. While it is certainly easier to organize a union in New York than in Alabama, leaders of the union drive face nothing less than arrests for their efforts, with the NYPD taking ALU President Christian Smalls along with workers Brett Daniels and Jason Anthony into custody on February 23rd of this year after Amazon called the cops on Smalls for supposed trespassing. So I guess, that's why people say it's illegal. They'll make it illegal if they possibly can. Meanwhile, Starbucks is desperately trying to prevent the ideological contagion that has set their baristas aflame. And I'm sure the Amazon situation has made that worse or better, depending on your point of view. Quoting the New York Post this morning, newly leaked video obtained by the pro-labor news site More Perfect Union shows Schultz, who retook the reins as interim CEO last month, and another top executive implored the managers to, quote, do your role of us union busting all over the country, end quote. Roseanne Williams, Starbucks president for North America, told the managers in the same video that it is, quote, your number one responsibility, end quote, to convince employees to vote no. Another quote from Williams, do your role as store manager and make sure your partners get balanced information about what's going on, especially in this role of us union busting all over the country, end quote. Schultz encouraged Starbucks managers to communicate the country's position to employees so that they, quote, understand what it would really mean to vote for a union, end quote.
Well, and a lot of workers are understanding what it really means to vote for a union. And that's why, in fact, they are unionizing across the country. Just last week, there's the first shop in Oregon that's a Starbucks in Eugene has organized successfully. And again, that is just sweeping the nation. I do believe that a flagship place, Starbucks in Seattle, has also organized. So I wanted to just give a little backdrop of history and context. I also want to thank y'all for joining us this morning and encourage you to subscribe if you have not done so already, and hit the like button on this video so it can do the algorithmic thing. Also share our channel with your friends, please, so that we can indeed grow this experience. So I want to talk a little bit of labor history, because April 20th, 420, not only one of my favorite days for, purposes of weed, but it actually has some historical significance, and that historical significance is pretty ugly. And that is, it's this week. 420 was the 108th anniversary of the Ludlow Massacre, one of the bloodiest moments in our labor history. As we are at the beginning of this resurgence in the workers' struggle for dignity and wages, I want to take a moment to remember that day in 1914 at a coal mine in Ludlow, Colorado, where at least 26 people were killed, including 15 women and children. There were about 1,200 miners striking and being organized by the United Mine Workers. Most of them worked for Colorado Fuel and Iron, which was owned by the Rockefellers, which Let's recall the Rockefellers, America's richest family at that time. The workers faced high mortality and worked 12-hour days for very little pay. They worked in company towns and shopped in company stores, and their lives were ruled over by company thugs who provided so called security for those towns. In 1913, miners went on strike against the company and were quickly evicted from the company towns. They moved into a tent encampment in the nearby hills where the Ludlow encampment was the largest. After a long struggle for better conditions, the governor called the National Guard to attack the striking workers. On April 20th, the Guard attacked the miners with machine guns, and the miners fought back. Some families tried to hide from the bullets by quickly digging pits under the tents. The Guard set fire to those tents, pouring kerosene on them and then torching them, burning the strikers out of their encampment. The next day, when workers were going through the remains of the camp, they found the charred remains of 4 women and 11 children dead in one of those pits, victims of the National Guard's fire.
And that's 20th century America.
1914. 2 of the strike leaders, Louis Ticus and John Lawson, were also killed that day. Lawson was executed by the Guard after being called out of the camp under the ruse of discussing a supposed truce. They called him out, got him alone, and executed him. Because, let's face it, authority figures, the gendarme, the Guard, the police, executions, extrajudicial executions, carrying out orders for the man, as it were, is nothing new.
Gee, I'm glad that's long ago. Police shooting people for no reason and people living in tents
And-
having to work for shit.
And police executions. Yeah, anyway, I digress. The strikers took up arms. They destroyed mines and they killed guards at the beginning of more than a week of guerrilla actions against the owners. The United Mine Workers put out a call to arms asking for people to come together with arms and ammunition for the defense of their struggle. They were joined by hundreds of armed workers from the Denver's Cigar Makers Union. About 500 men came to support. 400 women from Denver's unit Garment Workers Union. Remember, look for the union label. I had no idea in the 70s when I was a little kid whistling along with those really kind of corny television commercials about looking for the union label, the United Garment Workers Union. I had no idea that they had such a radical history, right? 400 women from the Garment Workers Union volunteered as nurses and medics during that week of guerrilla actions. There were national protests and demands that the National Guard be held to account. Eventually, Colorado's governor asked Woodrow Wilson to send in federal troops to quash the rebellion, and they were sent. More than 100 people were killed. No National Guardsmen nor any of the thugs were ever held accountable. And so remember this history. Remember the history of Rockefeller, who managed then to promote his image in the history books to that of a philanthropist over that of a murderous robber baron. And let us remember, Rockefellers, the richest family in the country at that time, and their robber baron techniques to keep the workers, small and divided, failed overall, right? The Ludlow Massacre happened. It was eventually put down, but that act of rebellion, that act of resistance, it's inspirational still. And I'm looking at the Amazon workers organizing, and Bezos being one of the richest men in the country, and it's such a struggle against so much capital, so much might, and I have great respect and admiration for the workers of Amazon organizing at this time. So,
All right then.
that's. Do you have anything to add?
It might be time to turn to Tarot.
Okay, well, so rarely see you silent. All right. So we when we threw the cards this week, we were really kind of a little surprised. I don't know why. Um, it's it's hard. It's hard to know how these things happen, except it's tarot. Last week we had um, the lovers and we had the devil, uh, and we had another card. I actually at this moment of my life cannot remember what other card we might have had. This week we have the lovers and we have the devil and we also have the moon. Three major arcana. For people that know tarot, to have three major arcana in a three card reading is kind of phenomenal.
And then have two cards repeated out of a 72 card deck.
And I did shuffle a whole lot, let's just say. So allow me to emphasize this message and emphasize it a lot. The lovers, please do take time to appreciate the beauty around you, the renewal that is spring. Take heart and take strength in your relationships, in your friendships, in your intimate partnerships. Know that this is our birthright, that beauty and intimacy and joy um, is ours, right? And also at the same time, be careful of behaviors that hold us back. Really examine those things that you do that aren't healthy, that aren't good for you. Know that ultimately we have the power to sort of slip our own chains, if you will. That to a huge extent, we have sort of developed self-defeating behaviors, right? And whether that's uh, addictions, whether that's sort of learned powerlessness, whether that's uh, not taking time for self care or loving or accepting yourself. These are all things that make us small, and we cannot afford to be small right now, right? The struggle needs us, and we need to be acting in our full power. So it is high time to jettison those behaviors, to be healthier, to take care of ourselves, so that we can give more to the struggle, as it were, so that we can be there for each other, so that we can encourage each other, inform each other, and fight alongside each other in this way that we renew and recreate the world around us, so that we can, in fact, walk that bridge to a better world. And this week, for the third card, we have the moon. And the moon is really about being in touch with our intuitive side, being in touch with our dreaming self, knowing our subconscious, and taking guidance from that, allowing ourselves to really understand our cycles and to understand our inner nature, our subconscious selves, more than we do at this time. It is a call for self knowledge and a call to let our intuitions guide us into new territory. And again, when we get into that new territory, let us be guides for each other. Let us hold the illumination for each other and help each other through. I believe it was Ram Dass who said that really we are just walking each other home. And I love that. I believe that. And so as we look at these cards, it is important to appreciate the joy around us, to understand that we have to make some changes to be stronger, be healthier, and be freer so that we can be there for each other. Understand that we do have the power to make changes happen in our lives and in the world around us. And to do so in a way that is guided by our intuitions, by spirit, and to remain uh, um, open to inspiration and new ideas as we recreate the world. So that's what I have. Please, my dear friends, Comment. Let us know how we are doing. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, share us with your friends and family.
And just before we go, I gotta say again, I just think it's adorable that the devil card in the cat deck is the dog. He's gonna get you.
Well, it's actually in the cat deck. It points out that the dog is collared really loosely, and if it just stopped for a moment to stop pulling against its own limitations, it could see it could experience freedom by slipping its collar. But it notes the interpretive book for the cat deck that, of course, it won't do that because it's a dog. Don't be like the dog, right? See where we can slip the collars, see where we can find freedom to support each other's struggles and to support each other.
Thanks for the comments. So I guess we'll be back next week then.
I suppose we will, and that'll be
right.
immediately before May Day or Beltane, as the case may be. It's the holiday of pagans, it's the holiday of workers. It is, read Peter Linesbaugh. He's got a great book about May Day and its history. And enjoy.
All right. Well, our love goes out to you and to all the ships at sea. Bye for now.